Hey, this is Deepak here from digitaldeepak.com and welcome to the second episode of the Startup Fuel podcast. In this episode, we are going to talk about how to learn about startups. And if you want to build a startup, you have to learn well about how to build a good startup. And for that, gaining new information and learning and education is very important. And in this episode, we are going to talk about how to go about learning about startups and the various methods that I have personally followed to learn about startups and how I ended up here. So before we get into that, let's have a small recap of episode 1. So in the episode 1, we talked about why you should be building a startup, and we talked about your personal gains, that you could end up having a lot of freedom, you could end up having a lot of wealth, you could contribute back to the society by doing good work, and you will also have a good work life because most of the people who go to jobs do not love their jobs. And if you're an entrepreneur, you will absolutely love what you are doing day in and day out. So these are the 4 major points that we listened in episode 1, and if you have not listened episode 1 completely, please go ahead and finish episode 1 before you go to episode 2, because a lot of things will be interconnected, and it is important that you go episode by episode and kind of absorb all the information that I am discussing about startups. So before we get into the exact methods of how to learn about a startup and the various approaches that you could take, let's take a little bit of a moment to go ahead and think about, do you have the spirit of entrepreneurship in you? And the spirit of entrepreneurship is something I feel every one of us is born with, but usually with schooling and education, that spirit within us is somehow killed. And for some people, that spirit might be still be alive within them, and they can rekindle that spirit and become a startup entrepreneur. For some people, it is completely dead already, and I feel sorry for them. So if you are listening to this podcast, and if you have been wanting to learn about startups because you have a dream of starting up someday, then I would definitely say that that spirit of entrepreneurship is not completely dead within you, because you have spent so much time listening to this podcast and you have been listening to this podcast. So that definitely says that you still have that spirit alive within you. And if you are listening to this podcast right now, and if you are the kind of person who has a little bit of entrepreneurship in your blood, then I'm pretty sure that you would relate to some of the things that I am going to talk about entrepreneurship and the spirit of entrepreneurship. So if you think about your childhood and how you have grown up, and if you think about your own human nature and as a person that you are, do you always try to test the boundaries, and do you go ahead and see what is beyond the horizon of whatever limits that the society has set on you? So if you are doing that, then that is definitely another validation about the spirit of entrepreneurship in you. Like for example, have you always thought about how something can be done better? Have you looked at a business that you thought that if you ran that business you would do something a little bit different and better? And if you have had such moments in your life, then that's again a validation of the spirit of entrepreneurship. And if you have always got into trouble at school, and if you have kind of spoken against someone, kind of questioned authority, and kind of always challenged the status quo and test the boundaries of the status quo about what could be done and what cannot be done, and if you are that kind of troublemaker at school, then definitely the spirit of entrepreneurship is strong within you. And have you ever thought about how something can be made more efficiently and how something can be done better? So if you have had such incidents in your childhood and as you are growing up, then welcome to the club. We are all entrepreneurs. We are all trying to make the world a better place. And one of the most common characteristics of us is that we get into trouble because we are the ones who are testing the boundaries of what is possible and what is not. We are always trying to do something different and new, and something that necessarily is not always against the rules, but I would say we are always trying to do something that is against the norm. And that is very important to have that spirit of entrepreneurship in you. Another common characteristics of having the spirit of entrepreneurship is that usually this spirit of entrepreneurship is the enemy of the schooling system and the enemy of parents, because entrepreneurship involves some level of innovation at its heart, and it's always about doing something new that no one has ever tried before and trying to do something different. And people in school, especially the teachers and principals, and also our parents, who want predictability out of us, who want to plan something for us and have it executed, is what they want. And they are usually against this entrepreneurship type of thinking because it makes them uncomfortable, because uncertainty makes people uncomfortable, because they don't know what the result is going to be. They are just afraid. And when I grew up, even my parents and not necessarily my teachers, because I wouldn't say I went to such a great school, but my parents also wanted me to have a job and have some predictability in life, and that is what every parent would want out of their son or their kids, and that is also something that you have to fight against. So the spirit of entrepreneurship is part of this, part of actually disappointing people. It could be brothers, it could be sisters, it could be spouse, it could be parents or grandparents, and everybody would give some advice which is actually the safest for you, rather than whether it is the best for you. And if you are the kind of person who cannot take the boredom that comes from regular jobs and the unpredictability about the future of your career that comes from jobs and all those things, and if you are trying to listen to other people, like relatives and friends and family, and if everybody says that please continue your job and please don't try entrepreneurship, then that is the best reason to go ahead and start being an entrepreneur and do something different, because all these people want predictability. And for entrepreneurs and for you and me and for people like us, that predictability and boredom is actually death to us. We just cannot survive with having a predictable life, and in the long term it actually becomes unpredictable. You cannot have a stable job in the long term if you do not get into entrepreneurship, because the whole world is moving towards automation, and a lot of jobs that used to exist in the industrial age and the pre-computer era, and even now, a lot of these jobs are going to go away and it's going to go to automation, and that way you will not be able to survive in a job either. So the general basic rule is that please don't ask advice from friends and family. Nobody, not even a single person in your entire friends and family, is going to say that go ahead and start a business, because obviously we know that the percentage chances of success with a business is not more than 20%. And if you go and ask some of your friends or family whether it is okay for you to start a business, and if they say yes, then if you fail in that business, you would go ahead and blame them, right? So that is not something that they would take a risk on. They would always say that don't try something new, don't try entrepreneurship, just continue in your job. And for them that is a safe option. And if you are going ahead and trying to get permission from someone to start a business, then you are not taking full responsibility of this new venture, because you are trying to get someone else to validate whether you are taking the right decision. And I can promise you, and I can bet that none of your friends and family will actually say that go ahead and start a business. So don't expect their approval, don't expect their permission. And if you start a business and if you screw up, you can always ask for their forgiveness, and that is why friends and family exist. They can forgive you, but they will not give you permission if you are looking for permission. So that is also part of the spirit of entrepreneurship, that you should be ready to disappoint people, especially friends and family, by trying to do something that they might not expect you to do. At the same time, I'm also going to tell you this, that you need to do it in a very responsible way, especially a financially and career responsible way. You cannot go ahead and have destruction of your financial treasures, and if you have saved up some money, you cannot go ahead and spend it on trying to run a startup. At the same time, you cannot destroy your career saying that you are going to do this whole startup thing. So I would advise against that kind of behavior. And in the future episodes of this podcast, we are going to talk about how to create a financial plan to support your entrepreneurship, how to create a financial plan to quit your job, and how to support yourself. So that's what I wanted to share, and do it in a responsible way, and think about whether you have the spirit of entrepreneurship in you. And if you are someone who always follows the rules, who always goes by the books, is always 100%, 100%, like 1000% honest, and if you have never tried anything new, you have always followed orders, you have never questioned anything, then probably entrepreneurship is not for you. And this is also something that is a truth that you have to accept. Even though I am doing a podcast on entrepreneurship and startups, and even though I will be at some point in the future selling a startup course with mentorship, I would want to go ahead and think about whether this whole startup thing is really for you. Because if it is not for you, and if you think that you are not having that spirit of entrepreneurship, a little bit of risk taking capability, and not being able to accept boredom at the office, then by all means go ahead and try entrepreneurship. But if you think that you don't have that spirit of entrepreneurship within you, and if you just want to follow orders, and if you want predictability and safety in your life, then don't try entrepreneurship. Just be in a job where you are comfortable at, and if you are good at something, and if you are in a well-paying job, there is nothing wrong in continuing in a job. So I think anybody who feels like entrepreneurship is not for them at this point in time should just stop listening to this podcast, and save some of the agony that comes from listening to hours and hours of learning about startups, and never starting up ever. Because you would be better off trying to maybe watch a movie or listen to music, and actually make good use of your time instead of listening to this very long podcast. But if you are a person who wants to become an entrepreneur, who wants to learn more about entrepreneurship, if you have that spirit of entrepreneurship that I have been talking about in this podcast, then continue this journey with me into many podcasts where we will be talking about startups, and rest of the people can just stop listening to this. So welcome everyone who is on this side, who are going to be entrepreneurs along with me, and by listening to this podcast. So now that we talked a little bit about recap of the first episode, then we talked about whether you really have it in you, in terms of thinking about do you have the spirit of entrepreneurship in you, and can you actually make a good entrepreneur. Let's also talk a little bit about my first startup venture and what I have been doing with my life, where I might be able to pick out a few examples of where it was like mini entrepreneurship or side project, where I could see the spirit of entrepreneurship in me working. So as a general rule, if you have tried to do something outside of the norm, something which is different, then you do have the spirit of entrepreneurship in you. As far as I can remember, the one thing which I was always fascinated at doing is actually trying to make some money on the side. And until my 10th standard, I did not actually try to make any money on the side. I think the first 20 rupees that I made was by sending a question to this comics called Tinkle, and inside Tinkle comics there is this section called Tinkle Tells You Why. And if you send a question to Tinkle Tells You Why, and if that question gets selected, then they would reward you with 20 rupees. And I think I did that somewhere around 5th or 6th standard, and I was basically doing 5th or 6th standard around 1996 or 1997, and that was my first ever hustle, my first ever 20 rupees that I made by actually doing something by myself. And that might not be something that can be considered as entrepreneurship, because it is just a one-off event. Something on a startup level or on a business level that I did was that when I was in 11th standard, and that was around 2000 or 2001, I guess. When I was in my school, that was the first time that I had lot of unrestricted access to my computer at home because I had completed my 10th exams and my dad actually allowed me to spend a lot of time with computers. And at that time, I got a computer and I also installed a CD writer in my computer. So this CD writer costed extra 4,000, and I wanted to try to recover the cost of adding a CD writer to my computer as much as possible. So I used to have a lot of games, and I used to copy these games on CD, and then I used to distribute it at my school. And I had a catalog of games that I had, around 10 games that I had, and anybody who wanted a game CD, I would give it to them, and I would give it to them at something like 40 rupees per disc. And if it is like a game which has 3 discs in it, then I would charge them something like 120 rupees, which is 40 rupees per disc. And I would buy these empty discs, which was something like 650 or 750 700 MB plain discs, where you can actually write on it, put it on a CD writer and get stuff written on it. So I don't know how many of you relate to this era, but people who are like, very young, and people who are probably around their 20s might not have used floppy disks and CDs in their life. But anybody who is more than 26 or 27, you remember the days when we had floppy disks and we had 700 MB disks, which was not even DVD, it was just called a compact disc CD. And that's what I was doing. I was buying blank discs at 13 rupees 50 paise. It was LG at that time, and I had a bunch of other options like Moser Bayer, Sony, and those were a little bit costly. Then we had very cheap CDs at 10 rupees as well. So I obviously did not go very low quality with my business. I bought LG discs at 13 rupees 50 paise, and wrote data on it if it is some game, and then I sold it for 40 rupees. And like this, I made enough sales. I think I made around 2000 to 2500 rupees during that period, and that was really exciting, and that was something of a startup nature that I did for the first time, and something that I am thankful for today, because maybe some of my startup success is rooted down in that project. And another thing that I did when I was doing my 12th exams is that I obviously did not like to study, and I did not believe in just cramming up the facts and trying to write a good exam and trying to get good marks, and basically go to a good college, try to get a good job, and running that rat race. And from that time I was a little bit lazy, and what I would do is that for my 12th board exams, I started thinking that, see, I cannot go ahead and read all my exam questions, because that takes a lot of time and takes a lot of effort. So I took questions from the previous 10 years question papers, and I basically wrote down the number of occurrences of each question. And I found out that certain questions were repeated frequently. In maths you had certain theorems which were repeated frequently in the exams, and in geography, history, in every subject there were like certain questions which were much more common. And I basically found out that there is an 80% chance that it will contain one of the questions from the previous question papers. And I basically only studied some 10 or 15 long form questions and answers for it, and basically I got 80% marks just by being extremely efficient in what I was actually studying. So this was some predictive analytics that I did long back when I was in 12th standard, and today predictive analytics and analytics is still a very important part of my business, and a very interesting area to work on. And that is something not everyone can be very comfortable with. And I wouldn't exactly say this is like a startup venture, but something along the startup thinking lines, where you are trying to be lazy and trying to be more efficient. So if you have ever thought about an easier way to do things, that can only happen because you are a little bit lazy. And there is also this famous quote by Bill Gates that he would basically give a job to the laziest person, because the laziest person would find the easiest way to do that particular job. And it might sound a little bit cliched kind of quote, but it is actually true. If you are actually very lazy, then you will have that spirit of entrepreneurship within you. I would say that, if you have the spirit of entrepreneurship within you, you might also have a little bit of laziness in you. But just because you are a little bit lazy, that does not mean that you might have the spirit of entrepreneurship in you. So it doesn't go both ways. So think about that. So now that we have covered a little bit of what we learned in the first episode, then we talked about the spirit of entrepreneurship. Then I talked about some of my personal experiences from my childhood. Now let's have a look at how exactly we are going to learn about startups and what is the best way to learn about startups. Because learning about startups and getting that startup mentality and startup thinking is very important for you to be successful in your startup long term. Just having the spirit of entrepreneurship is not going to be enough for you to go ahead and be a successful startup entrepreneur. There is a lot of things that you need to learn. What we talked about until now is just having that spirit, and a lot of people have a startup spirit, and but they don't know a lot, and if they had known a lot, they would probably do much better in life and in business. And that is what we need to think about. We need to think about what are we going to do to learn more about startups and to learn more about this whole skill of building a business from scratch and actually making it successful. So one of the best and the best ways to learn about how to run a startup is to actually work in a startup company. And the smaller the startup is and the more early stage the startup is, the more you will learn about how to run a company. If you join a large organization, then there is not much things you can learn, because you are basically like a small gear in a very big machine, and you have no idea how this big machine works. And that is completely fine, because if you are just looking for a job, and if you are just looking to do your responsibilities and take home a monthly salary every month, and you don't need to worry about anything, then it's fine. You can work in a very big organization. But if you want to learn about how to grow startups and how startups work, go ahead and work in a startup where you don't have more than 20 or 30 people kind of startup. And in this startup, you will be able to interact with the founder of the startup itself directly, and from them you will be able to learn a lot. And if you know about me and my personal journey, you know that I have worked in a lot of early stage startups. So when I joined Exotel, there were around only 15 people. When I joined Practo, it was around 300 people. So it was not exactly that level of an early stage startup. Then I joined this company called InstaMojo when there were only 10 people. Right now InstaMojo has more than 100 people. And then I joined this company called Razorpay, where I was something like the 21st employee or something. And now Razorpay has more than 200 people. So when you join early stage startups at a very early stage, you are able to interact with the founders, and you are able to interact with the people who started the company, and you also get a little bit of their thinking imbibed in you, and that absolutely helps you build a successful startup. So that is one thing. And if you are yet to work in a startup, and if you have some time before you try to do a startup gig, you can also read a lot of books about startups. Some of the books that I would recommend, which I will also link below this video. So one is called The Lean Startup. The Lean Startup methodology is done by this guy called Eric Ries, and he basically talks about how to create a minimum viable product, which we will talk about in the future episodes of this podcast. One entire episode I will just talk about how to create minimum viable products. And this particular book just talks about how to create products in a minimum viable way and actually take it to the market. And there is plenty of other things that you will learn about startups while reading this book. There is this book called 4-Hour Work Week: Escape the 9 to 5, Live Anywhere and Join the New Rich. Some of the concepts in this book cannot be applicable to us directly, but you will definitely get a lot of new ideas from this book as well. There is this book called 0 to 1 by Peter Thiel, who is also the co-founder of PayPal along with Elon Musk, and right now he runs a company called Palantir, which is also $1 billion company. So you should definitely read this book 0 to 1. And this is also an optional book that you can read, which is called the $100 Startup. So $100 Startup by Chris. And if you are watching the video version of this podcast, all of this is being displayed on the video here, and I have also listed these books below wherever I have published this podcast. So you can go ahead and purchase it, and basically go ahead and search for some more books about startups and make your own decision. You don't need to read every startup book that is available out there to actually learn everything about startups before you get started. If you read some 5 to 10 books which are good startup books, that should be more than enough for you to learn about startups. So you can go ahead and listen to podcasts like this one. Obviously I am selling my own podcast here, but you can keep learning. You can keep learning from different sources about startups, and that is going to help you a lot get some foundational concepts ready before you actually go ahead and jump into a startup. And one of the best ways to go ahead and learn how a startup works is to have a very small startup yourself. You can call it a micro startup if you want, and basically this is something like a side project that you do where you make something like maybe 5,000 rupees or 10,000 rupees, and try to learn something about how value creation works and how selling a product or service works. So even if you create some physical product, even if you go ahead and try to create a small lemonade stand and sell lemonade, or sell tea at your local street, whatever you do, something that is entrepreneurial in nature, and something that you can go ahead and have the experience of it. So even if you spend something like 10,000 rupees and only make 5,000 back, it is still okay, because 5,000 you have spent on learning something new, and sometimes it takes money to learn something new. So that is what you should be doing. You should do something on the side and have some startup experience even before you try to get into some projects on a serious note to actually make money. You can always think about doing something new, and you should come out of the hesitation to try something new, and you should not ask anyone's permission for it, and you should always do something, and if you screw it up you can ask for forgiveness. That has always worked for me. And if you have heard about this quote where Mark Zuckerberg has said, move fast and break things, and that is so very true in a startup, where you always try to do something new and learn from it, and then you go ahead and correct it. And sometimes when you try to move fast, then you might break some things, and it's perfectly fine. You just take a step back and correct what you have done or what you have ended up screwing up. So for example, if you want to listen to one such example in my own business where I tried to move fast and break things, so I introduced this affiliate program for my 100-day blogging course, and at that time I kept thinking about launching a perfect affiliate program, but that never happened, because the right script or the right software to create an affiliate program, especially on an Indian market with Indian payment gateways, just did not exist. And there was an experimental affiliate program with this payment gateway itself called InstaMojo, and I knew that there were some issues with the payment gateway, but I went ahead and launched the affiliate program using InstaMojo's internal affiliate program or the affiliate software directly. And it actually backfired a little bit, where there were a lot of tracking issues. A lot of people were complaining that this is not working, but then we stopped using that, and then we paid our affiliates directly. But at the same time, there was a ton of things that I learned about how many people are ready to actually go ahead and promote my product as an affiliate. And if you go ahead and search for 100-day blogging course review, you will be able to see that there are so many people who have actually written reviews of the 100-day blogging course. So let me just Google it and see if I can find any review. So I've just searched for 100-day blogging course review, and you can see that the first result, second result, fifth result, sixth result. So everything is a review where people have written about my own product on how the 100-day blogging course actually works. And then I learned that there are a lot of people who are ready to promote me as an affiliate, and now I have started looking for a very robust affiliate system. And right now we have built our own internal system of affiliate tracking system, where people get rewarded whenever they go ahead and promote our products. So this is just one example I wanted to give you, where you should have the mindset of always trying out something new. And if you are working in a startup, and most of the startups encourage this, that people who are working in a startup should always take new initiatives and go ahead and try to do something new. And if you are working in a startup and if you are trying to do something new, you can do it without having the cost of it. In the sense that if you tried something new and if it did not actually work, it is completely okay, because you are not paying the price of it. And this startup that you are working for, if they are encouraging you to go ahead and try new things, you should absolutely grab that opportunity and try new things, because getting into the habit of doing new things and getting into the habit of starting new initiatives is the most important essence of a startup entrepreneur. And this is something that we talked about in the previous episode as well, where we discussed that doing new things and taking initiatives without having a very good clarity of what you are getting back is going to take some courage, going to take some boldness, and you should get into the habit of doing things. Like, for example, when I launched the first episode of this podcast, I was completely not sure what kind of thing I am starting here and what kind of shape that this particular podcast would take. And after I published my first podcast, I had thousands of views on YouTube and SoundCloud, and I had many people who had commented that this is the kind of content that they were looking for until now, and they absolutely enjoyed this long form podcast where I am talking for like 30 minutes or 1 hour and discussing a lot of things. And this gave me a lot of motivation, and this might not ever have happened if I did not get started. And doing podcast with this style and doing a completely different type of content delivery, where I'm doing this long form content with a casual talking, coffee table type of talking approach, where sometimes you can see that I am making mistakes. It is not that perfect, and I was very uncomfortable to launch something which is not that perfect, because I've always launched perfect ebooks, perfect videos. But some certain projects it is okay, because creating value and getting it done is more important than not getting it done in a perfect way, right? So you should have that attitude completely within you. You should go ahead and keep trying new things, keep breaking things. And that's one more thing which I wanted to talk about. Keep hustling, do something, and make money on the side. And a lot of people ask me that when you are trying something like startup related things and trying something new which might make money, a lot of people are a little bit confused whether it is okay to take money in my personal savings account. Is it okay to start a business without registering it as a business, and things like that. And my experience personally is that if you are just starting out and if you are going to make like a few lakhs in revenue, anything less than 3 lakhs or anything less than even 5 lakhs, it is okay to receive the money in your personal account. And once you receive the money in your personal account, you can just withdraw it from an ATM and just go ahead and spend it also. It is that simple. Nobody is going to care about whether you did some business project and made some money and whether you paid tax on it or whatever like that. If it is going to be a small amount like 1 or 2 lakhs, you can just always transact it using your savings account. If you are doing something more than like 10 lakhs for an entire year as a business, then you might need to start thinking about whether you want to register your company, whether you want to open a current account, whether you want to do like a private limited company or a LLP or a partnership or whatever. But until you make your first 10 lakhs, don't really worry about the legal structures. Nobody is going to come and say that no, you should not be doing. If you have a bank account and if you can receive money, by all means go ahead and try something which will make money on the side. As long as you are not doing something which is against the law, it should be okay, and nobody is going to bother if you put a few lakhs in your bank and not really properly account for it, right? So because getting started is really important, and there is this whole thing called presumptive income taxation, where if you talk to a CA and if you say that you are in a job and you made around 5 or lakhs or 10 lakhs per year as an employee, and if you had some side income where you have made some 5 lakhs extra as a business, then you just need to pay 8% of that 5 lakhs as taxes. It is called presumptive income. I think it has become 6% now. Recently it's not even 8%. So that is something you can always go ahead and file it as a presumptive income tax, because you are just doing something on the side. It's not really serious. When you get serious, you go ahead and register a company, get a GST number, file your monthly GST and annual taxes and everything. So right now at our startup company, we have registered the startup company as a private limited company, and we have a full-time accountant and a CA auditing us, and the accountant is filing taxes every month and things like that. But don't let figuring out all these prevent you from starting something on the side, right? So getting started is important. And a lot of people ask me, what should I exactly get started with if I want to make money on the side, and if I want to try something which is startup in nature, and try some new initiative and I don't know what to do. So for those people, the answer is basically you can try blogging, you can try affiliate marketing, and you can try freelancing. And this is something that I keep talking about, and I teach people how to do blogging, freelancing and affiliate marketing. So this is not the limit. So if you want to try something else, like even opening a store, physical store, or getting into the manufacturing business or something like that, by all means do it. A lot of opportunity lies outside the digital arena. But if you do not have access to anything, and if you have no idea what to get started in, then you can try blogging, affiliate marketing or freelancing. So that's about it for the episode 2 of the podcast. We talked about the entrepreneurship spirit. We talked about some of my own personal entrepreneurship experiments that I did when I was a kid. Then we talked about what is the best way to learn about startups. You work in a startup company, you read books about startups, and you listen to podcasts like this one, and you also go ahead and try to start a side project and make some money on the side, so that you can always have some income that you have made, something apart from your main job or something apart from your primary income source. And that would give you a lot of motivation, and having done something on the side and having made money will slowly get you into the startup mindset and thinking like an entrepreneur. And that type of thinking is very importantly. See, anybody who is a startup entrepreneur would say that what they have gained by doing like 5 years of startup or 10 years of startup, everybody says that, okay, I got some network connections, I made some money, now I have more experience and things like that. But the biggest thing that people get out of entrepreneurship when trying an entrepreneurship venture is the change in mindset of how you work and how you look at the whole concept of value creation and what you are contributing back to this world as part of the human race and as a member of the society. What are you giving back? And getting to that mindset is the biggest thing that entrepreneurs learn when they do a startup project or whatever. And change in that mindset is actually a superpower. It actually helps you get started with new initiatives, move into the market with confidence, and actually take away what you think is rightfully yours. So if you actually come out with a good product, then you have to have the mindset that the customers better pay for it, and let them pay a good price for it. So that is the kind of mindset that you end up creating. And then you start seeing how inefficient the whole economy is, and how as an entrepreneur you can put a dent in the economy by being more efficient and creating value for other people, having personal satisfaction as well of what you are doing, and making the world basically a better place. So having this mindset is a superpower, and it does not come within a few years. It will take at least 10 years for you to become like a core entrepreneur at heart, who can basically start any project and make it successful. So for me it has taken 10 years. So since my hustling projects in 2007 2008. Right now we are in 2018, and I have worked in a bunch of startups, and I have tried to start up several times in my life and failed several times. I have had many co-founders, and then the partnership failed, the relationship failed, and then I got one more co-founder, and finally I settled on one long-term co-founder. And then we are doing a startup which is actually doing good in revenues. It is going to take time to get to this stage, and it is going to be a very very difficult journey. We also talked about how emotionally it is going to be difficult in the last episode. In a way, I think that the whole startup thing being very difficult is also a good thing, because if it is going to be easy, then everybody is going to do it. And if everybody is going to do it, how is it going to be any special if you are a successful entrepreneur? So if you have mastered your emotions, if you have mastered your analytics, if you have mastered your finances, if you have mastered your hiring, and if you actually create a startup which is making something like 10 lakh a month in revenue or 1 crore a year in revenue, it is going to feel pretty good that you have actually put yourself through so much trouble of experiencing emotional highs and lows, putting your finances and career at risk, and basically becoming a successful entrepreneur is going to be an extremely satisfying journey. And because it is going to be extremely satisfying, all the more reason that you should try it and try to become an entrepreneur and basically become a better human in the process. Forget about all the wealth and the contribution and whatever you are going to do. You just become a better human being trying to do entrepreneurship, and that is something that I feel a lot of entrepreneurs would agree with me on. So now that we have covered a lot in this episode about how to learn, and we talked about the spirit of entrepreneurship, now that I believe that you have a little bit of more motivation and a little bit of fire inside you, I hope I have rekindled that spirit of entrepreneurship within you, and the fire is burning a little bit fiercer now. Now the next step is that thinking about how to exactly start a side project and become a full-time entrepreneur without risking your finances and without going into debt and without risking your career as well. So in the next episode we are going to talk about how you can plan to quit your job and how you can start creating a financial plan to try entrepreneurship for 2 years, because entrepreneurship again is not something that you try once in life and if it fails you give up and you don't touch it again. Entrepreneurship is something which is like you need to do multiple rounds of it. You will do multiple projects, you will learn something, you will burn your fingers, and then when you do it again you will do it in a better way. So that is how you have to think about it. So the first thing that you have to do is create a plan so that you can be an entrepreneur for 2 years, and you need to create a proper financial plan for it. We will talk about it in the next episode on how to plan your finances and how to quit your job. I will also give you ideas about what you can tell your boss to quit your job if you are trying to start your own business, because most of the time if you just go and tell your boss that you are starting your own business, then first they will be jealous of you, they might be a little bit intimidated by you, and they will also try to demotivate you because they think that your startup cannot work, because obviously they are running a business and they are a boss and they think they know everything about starting and running a successful business. And if you are an employee working there, a good percentage of the bosses are good, but a good percentage of the bosses are also just humans, right? They feel jealous and they will actually tell you reasons why your startup might fail. So you should never go ahead and tell your boss that you are going to go ahead and start your own startup. It will be the first point of demotivation for you. So we will talk about that. We will talk about ideas to tell your boss so that you can quit your job and start a business. We'll talk about the financial plans and everything, so that I help you actually get into this whole experience of doing a startup. So that is one of my goals. And again, talking about my long-term goals, I need to create 1,000 successful entrepreneurs who will be successful. And if I think about 20% of entrepreneurs who can actually become successful, I need to inspire at least 5,000 different people to go ahead and start their own business. So that is my goal, and I really want you to be in the 1,000, which is actually the people creating the successful startups. And for that, keep listening to my podcast and keep tuning in. Keep commenting, keep motivating me to go ahead and create more podcasts like this, and basically share your questions on the comments wherever you are consuming this podcast. And these questions usually give me new ideas on what content that I should cover in the future podcast. So thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed listening to this podcast as much as I enjoyed making it, and I will see you in the next podcast. Bye bye.